we all take our seats? We're going to get started. We have a jam-packed afternoon. So again, good afternoon on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. My name is Abiola Awusanya, and I'm your MC for the third annual Looking Back into the Future Black History Month Conference. The theme for this year is Celebrating Living Legends. I certainly hope that you are all as excited as I am to listen, learn, and share with the amazing lineup of speakers and performers that we are going to experience this afternoon. So we would like to begin by first acknowledging that the land on which we are gathered is the traditional and unceded territory of the Mississaugas of New Credit First Nation. So to get the afternoon started, I would like to introduce you. We have an Afro-Caribbean dance group by the name of the Rhythm Fit Kids. Just to give you a little history about that, Keisha Facey founded Rhythm Fitness Incorporated in 2014, bringing with her an extensive background in Afro-Caribbean dance, fitness instruction, and best practices in mental health and wellness. So she has a studio located in Ajax, and the dance program is for adults and children ranging from ages 5 and up. So I would like you all to give them a warm welcome as the Rhythm Fit Kids perform for us. Come on in.
One way. Qui j'en a fait, m'pas qu'à comprendre, ça qu'à vivre comme si pas ni problème. Pourtant ça savent, la vie la reine, qui j'en a fait pour payer ça qu'aimé. Sous place et ça le médicament nous nie. Sous place et ça le médicament nous nie. Ça, pas moins plan là, moins pé ça, comprendre. Pas moins plan là, m'poko saisi, si jamais je m'en tombé malade. Sous place, ça le médicament nous nie. 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 Si c'est ça même, on nous ouké. On nous voit.
Maman plan là, m'poko saisi si jamais
as well as the national anthem.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all our sons' command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let a rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it sound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory is won. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who has brought us thus far on the way, thou who has by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray, lest our feet stray from the places, oh God, where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadows beneath thy hands, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shannon Oyedaran. I am the conference host. Thank you so much for coming to the third annual Looking Back into the Future Black History Month conference.
Before I go any further, I unfortunately have to report that Zanana Akande will not be making it today, unfortunately. She's had the flu for the past couple weeks and is still under the weather, and just kind of let me know on short notice, but we will make do. We have a tribute to her. We have Spider Jones here, we have Gina Augustine here. It's going to be a wonderful afternoon, and I just want to thank everyone so much for coming. So as I said, the third edition of the Looking Back into the Future Black History Month Conference. Today we will honor Jean Augustine, we will honor Spider Jones, and celebrate the Black community in Canada, our living pioneers. They have spent their lives working tirelessly to pave the way for us, for future generations, to be the best that we can be, and they've been the best that they can be, and we take note from them. So we just want to celebrate to them today. I also just want to make mention that we are in, I don't know if anybody knows, we're in the International Decade for the People of African Descent that the UN declared. Do we all know that? Yes, awesome. So from 2015, so it was 3 years ago, so we're now entering into the third year till 2024. This is our decade where we can celebrate our people, the diaspora, those on the African continent, those here. We will celebrate us. And another big marker for this decade is that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on January 30th, just before Black History Month, made an announcement and acknowledged this as being the decade. So that's a big step for us. So just want to, acknowledge that and know that we're in a decade that's for us and to really move forward. And as we continue to work towards a great future, we cannot overemphasize the need for us to continue to work together collaboratively. That's very important. The challenges and issues confronting our society and community today shows clearly that one single person, organization, or an institution cannot solve them all by themselves. We need to work together as a team, networking and synergizing our efforts in order to bring about lasting change and progress. We need to do this especially for our children and the coming generations. And I'm sure you guys have seen my little one running around Aralua. I look at him and I see the need for community teamwork within the Black community with other communities across Canada, just to make their future brighter, to make it better. We saw the young people dancing today to make things better for them as well. So just want to end with that, and thank you so much again for coming. Enjoy the afternoon. We have wonderful vendors, as you can see. We have health products, beauty products, bags, books, everything that you need to equip yourself. So please feel free to visit their tables, support them. Thank you once again for coming, and enjoy the afternoon. Look at all that she's done. So Zanana Akande was born in Toronto in 1937. She's a former Canadian politician. She was the first Black woman elected to the Legislative Assembly of Ontario and the first Black woman to serve as a cabinet minister in Canada. Her parents come from St. Lucia and Barbados, and they worked here as teachers. She holds a Bachelor of Arts and Master of Education degree from the University of Toronto, and was also educated at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, Boise. So these are just some of her occupations. She was a teacher, a principal, a journalist, a politician, a cabinet minister. And from 1990 to 1994, she represented the downtown Toronto riding of St. Andrew and St. Patrick and served as a cabinet minister in the government of Bob Rae. And she currently, after leaving politics, is the president of the Urban Alliance on Race Relations. She worked with community-based groups including the United Way of Greater Toronto, the Family Services Association, and the Elizabeth Fry Society. And she's had many awards: African Canadian Achievement Award of Education, Award of Distinction from the Congress of Black Women. And post-life, so what she's doing now, she is currently involved with the Black Legal Action Center, as well as recently the Women's March in Toronto, which focuses on inclusion and equality. And just some screen grabs of her speaking at the Women's March. And again, serving the Black Legal Clinic here in Ontario. So just a bit about Zanana and who she is and what she's done. She did mention to me when I spoke to her that she does want to still speak to the community. So if you guys would be interested, there is a feedback survey on your chairs. There's a question there. If anybody's interested for future events like this, please let me know and we can have her back or have her here. She's definitely willing to come and be a speaker for us. So let's just celebrate her even now, even though she's not here. Let's just celebrate Zanana Akonde, all she's done.
The United Nations International Decade for People of African Descent was proclaimed by the UN General Assembly to be observed from 2015 to 2024. It provides a framework for the member states, civil society, and others to take effective actions in the spirit of recognition, justice, and development. Today, 200 million people of African descent live in North, Central, and South America, as well as the Caribbean. Millions more live in other parts of the world. The population of Africa itself is now 1.2 billion. The purpose of the decade is to strengthen actions and measures to ensure full realization of the economic, social, cultural, and political rights, as well as the potential of African people.
As a UN Ambassador of Goodwill for the International Decade of People of African Descent, I implore policy leaders, policymakers, and fellow global citizens from all backgrounds to do the right thing and act, not just talk, debate, and issue formal declarations.
During the 15th century, the transatlantic slave trade violently displaced over 12 million African people. Between the 1870s and 1900s, Africa faced European imperialist aggression, diplomatic pressures, military invasions, and eventual colonization. The continent's immense natural wealth and human resources continued to be plundered in subsequent centuries. According to the United Nations, people of African descent constitute some of the most marginalized groups in the world. They also tend to suffer multiple aggravated or intersecting forms of discrimination. People of African descent have made enormous contributions to society. This includes inventions like the elevator, traffic light, laser eye surgery, open heart surgery, industrial lubricant, the wrench, street sweeper, fountain pen, pencil sharpener, and others. Many have demonstrated mastery in business, media, sports, justice, collective vision, leadership, and more. While people of African descent make up 3% of the population, they account for 10% of the Canadian prison population. There are 70% more Black Canadians in federal prison than there were 10 years ago. School dropout, lack of access to opportunities, anti-Black racism, and many other problems severely limit success. Local, provincial, and the federal government need to make a commitment to eradicating the roadblocks that truncate their progress.
Racism persists, yes, even in this country. That inequality lingers still, despite the work done, and that is why we need trailblazers to team up with entertainers and young entrepreneurs to help others become agents of change, because there is still much work to do.
According to data from Statistics Canada, African Canadians are the third largest visible minority group with a population of about 1.2 million. Meanwhile, the second largest group of immigrants coming to Canada is from Africa. This calls for strategic action. Organizations like the Michael Jean Foundation, Federation Federation of Black Canadians and others are all building solidarity in the community and with all people of goodwill to accelerate positive change. Future generations of African Canadians will continue to stand on the shoulders of trailblazers such as civil rights icon Viola Desmond, First African Canadian Governor General Michael Jean, Lieutenant Governors Lincoln Alexander of Ontario, and May Ann Francis of Nova Scotia, entrepreneur and philanthropist Michael Lee Chin, sports legend Harry Jerome, jazz pianist Oscar Peterson, the Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine, first Black female Member of Parliament, and champion for the recognition of Black History Month across Canada.
We have a moral imperative to stand, demand, and show what respect means beyond colorful words and formal declarations. Mass incarceration, lack of access to education, to employment, to healthcare, and to political decision-making categorize the fundamental injustices, all too characteristic of the treatment of peoples of African descent in America and throughout the world.
The United Nations International Decade for People of African Descent is a time for the world to reclaim its lost humanity, to right the wrongs of history, and chart a path of harmony and unhindered prosperity that will impact present and future generations.
Tells me that I must go. Can't stay around too long before my track's gonna catch me. When they do, I've got to be somewhere in LA, so I can look at the side and get my thinking done.
So, that was my first time seeing that video, and this is an important time. And we all need to be aware of our responsibility in it as well, right? So we'd like to get right into our speakers. So first we have Spider Jones. Spider is also, among other things, a highly popular motivational speaker who is much admired for his diligent work with youth. His inspirational life story, Out of the Darkness, reveals his amazing rise from the impoverished, gang-infested inner-city projects of Detroit and Windsor, and how as a grade 5 dropout, he eventually returned to school at the age of 30 to become an honor student. So I think we have a lot to learn from Spider Jones, and over the past 20 years, he is interviewed with notables such as Muhammad Ali, Jesse Jackson, LL Cool J, and countless others. So I'd like you all to help me to welcome Mr. Spider Jones today as he comes to share with us.
Thank you very much. Oh, yeah, I like that. That picture was taken about 20 years ago when I had a 6-pack. Now it's a 12. So, you know what I'm saying? It's great to be here, and how much time do I have, actually? Shannon? How much? 10 minutes? What the heck is going on? 10 minutes?
15.
I got a podium here. I'm the son of a Black Baptist minister. I got a microphone, and you're giving me 10 minutes to talk. Woo! How's everybody today? You got a nice crowd. So let me begin by saying I like to address young people as much as the adults, the older ones, because as I always say, in terms of giving to your community and furthering your career or your life, as long as we're living, we got to keep giving. And as long as we're breathing, we got to keep believing in ourselves. I'll be 75 years old come April the 20th. 20 years old. I was 75 years old. Yeah. I was born the same day as Hitler. Isn't that interesting? My friend George Chevello. Anybody heard of George Chevello? What do you mean no? You ain't heard of George Chevello? How many have heard of George Chevello? He calls me every birthday, April the 20th, and he congratulates me. And his last words is, "You were born on the same day as Hitler." That's, what can I do? I can't smack him in the head. He's George Chevello. The guy had 97 fights. Ali couldn't knock him down. Fraser, Foreman, nobody could knock him down, so I sure couldn't. And why I bring George's name up is because he's instrumental, him and Muhammad Ali, in my career. For those that don't know me, or my past history, I'm an ex-convict. I did some time in prison as a young man. But I always dreamed of becoming a radio personality. I always wanted to be a radio broadcaster, have my own show. When I was a young man, I was frightened of the dark. So my mother would leave the radio playing all night long. And it sort of was my opium. That radio, listening to the music, would sort of ease the troubled waters of my mind. Because I was frightened of the dark. I mean, it was beyond a fright. I was sick of the dark. I was that frightened. That got me sick. I couldn't sleep. And I would listen to the radio, and it was some real good music back then, because R&B was just coming into its own. And there was this disc jockey, and he did a show out of New York, but we got it in Detroit. And he went coast to coast like buttered toast every night. And his name was Alan Freed. Anybody ever hear of Alan Freed? I see a couple. Anybody out here ever heard of Alan Freed? Alan Freed was a white disc jockey from Cleveland, Ohio, who loved black music. And back in the day, they didn't call it R&B, they called it race music. And none of the mainstream stations would play black music. We had people like Clyde McPhatter, Etta James, and last, my love has come along. You know what I'm saying? Ray Charles, Sam Cooke, people you never heard of. And I'd listen to everybody, but what really got me was these disc jockeys with them great voices. They not only played the music, they would talk about it 22 minutes after the hour on a beautiful Friday night. That, of course, was Clyde McPhatter and the Drifters doing Celia Hold My Hand and all that stuff. And I said, wow, I love the way they talk. And so, when I was 10 years old, I went to a performance at the Fox Theater in Detroit, where Alan Freed, this little white disc jockey, came up them steps. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big Detroit welcome to Alan Freed. And this guy come on the stage, and there was a stage about the length of this, the width of this building. And he's on the stage, and he's waving, and I watch him, throwing kisses up to the crowd in the nosebleed seats, and the whole place is exploded with applause. And I'm watching from the third or fourth row in. And it hit me like a Mike Tyson left hook. Or Mike Tyson left hook. It hit me. Bam! I knew from that day at 10 years old what my career would be. But I got to tell you something. I want young people especially to listen to me. I was told from day one that radio was not a place for people of color, especially black folks. I remember the first time I shared that dream, and I still remember, because that is 65 years ago. Going up Woodward Avenue, Detroit, Michigan, I told my cousin Sonny that I was going to be a radio disc jockey just like Alan Freed. I'm going to go coast to coast. Everybody going to listen to the Spider. He said, man, you talk like a fool. Now this was my cousin, and he was my hero. His mother and my mother were sisters. He was 18. And he said to me, radioing for black folks, he used the N-word. They did back then, you know. Neighbor. No. Howdy, neighbor. No. What's up, Mike? Anyway, that was it. And that's all I ever heard. Radio was not for the brothers. So I got to tell you something. I was 10 years old. I didn't get my first gig in radio until I was 40 years old. That's 30 years I didn't get it because I listened to negative people. People that didn't believe in themselves. Why would I expect them to believe in me? Why would I expect them to envision my dream when they did not have a dream of their own? Their dream were to be pimps and hustlers. That's the truth. That's the crowd that I hung with. And I'm not blaming them because I went to prison. Because I'm responsible for myself. Now, years later, I went back to school at 35 years old because I finally got hip. I want to be in radio, and so did millions of others. But they got an education and a diploma. I ain't got nothing. So I finally went back to school because my wife, said, you can do this. I didn't believe I could do it. She said, you can do this. You got the gift of gab. You have so much information. Like I'm a music historian. I can tell you about Sam Cooke. Lou Rawls. Did you know that Sam Cooke and Lou Rawls were both in the same group called the Soul Stirrers? And I saw them as a kid. It was a gospel group. That Clyde McFadden left Billy Ward and the Dominoes. And who took his place? Somebody you never heard of. Jackie Wilson. How many heard of Jackie Wilson here? Lonely teardrops, you know, my pillows. I would have heard a bit. I'm too late for this. But I graduated from university at 40 years old. And check this out. I graduated with 100%. 25 in math, 25 in English, 25 in literature, 25 in spelling. That's an old one, but it gets them every time. I don't have much time left, but I got to tell you something. When I first got out of radio, first got into radio, I sent out probably 50 demo tapes. And I called it the Spider's Web. And we are bringing the nitty-gritty back to the city, the lovable one. I was crazy. They never heard that kind of stuff. And nobody, I got all these letters back in the mailbox. Thank you for showing an interest in our station or us, but at this particular time, the Dear John letter said no. I kept going to the mailbox and getting these Dear John letters, and I was ready to give up, but again, my wife, she was my entire support system. I had messed up so much as a person, quit on myself so many times that nobody but my wife believed in me. And she said, it'll happen, it'll happen. Then one day I get a call from George Cervello. He said, come on down, I want you to audition for a TV show we're doing, which was called Famous Knockouts. Look it up on YouTube. Spider Jones and George Cervello, Famous Knockouts. And I got my first gig. It was in television. And we went coast to coast, and that opened up the radio show. And in 1994, I was called to the Fan 590 to do an interview. I'd been doing a show out of Oakville called The Spider's Web, a small show. And they called me in, and I broke down a boxing match that was, I forget which one it was, but it was a fight, I think Larry Holmes fight. But at any rate, they liked my style, and they gave me a job. And within a year, they sent me coast to coast, and I became the first black man in Canadian history to go coast to coast on his own sports show. But I got to tell you something. Just before I go, I'll share something with you. It wasn't easy being the first black in radio, covering all these press conferences, and people look at you like you got the plague. You're the plague. They look at you different. What's this brother doing covering hockey? Now we got PK Subban and all these other guys in hockey. And guys like Dwight Drummond, these guys would come to me and ask me questions. And they would ask me, is it worth it? Well, it is worth it. Because going coast to coast, I had the opportunity to interview some of the most famous people in the world, including Bill Clinton, Muhammad Ali many times. I got to run with him. I got to live my dream. So I got to say this in closing, especially to young people. My father used to have an old saying, everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. Here's what I'm talking about. When you have a dream, and you know it's realistic, and you want to bring it into reality, hone in on it, focus on it, and don't listen to nothing negative, and surround yourself with people that believe in you. Young people, don't surround yourself with people who want to do drugs and drink and get high and hang on the street corners. I did that. It gets you nowhere. Stay focused. Look for mentors. You have to believe to achieve. And how do you begin to believe? You believe because you set goals and you stay on them. Thank you. I hope you enjoy the rest of the afternoon. And thank you for having me. God bless you, every one of you. Thank you.
Dr. Jean Augustine. But before I do introductions for her, I wanted to remind you all that the 50-50 draw is still being sold in the front. So please feel free to step out quickly and go and grab it if you need to. And we'll announce winners at the end of the program. So, about a little bit, just a little bit, of Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine. She's a trailblazing politician, social activist, and educator. She was the first African-Canadian woman to be elected to the House of Commons, the first African-Canadian woman to be appointed to the federal cabinet, and the first Fairness Commissioner of the Government of Ontario. After arriving in Canada in 1960, she advanced her education and career prospects, participated in grassroots organizations to strengthen minority and women's rights, and served her community and the city of Toronto with great passion and charisma. So I'd like you all to welcome with me the Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine.
Thank you and good afternoon. I am so very pleased to be invited to be with you. I understand that this is the third annual event, and so I want to thank those of you who are here for event number 1, number 2, and now number 3, because I think it's so important for us to keep things sustainable. You'll find me leaning a bit, and I'll tell you what's going on, because there might be someone here who has a special remedy for this. I have something that's called a sciatic nerve. You know what that is? And you know how every so often it just pinches, and it chooses its time, right? So today is the day. So I'm leaning just to get a bit of an ease. And young people, I always say sit up straight, hold your back up, push your chest out, but I'm not doing this right now. Thank you, Shannon, for inviting me. Thank you all those who've supported Shannon. I see so many of the community entrepreneurs around. Thank you for what you do to make community what it is. Thank you too. I see representative from my friend Selena Chevan's, Cesar Chevan's office here, and also Reverend Pastor Macaulay Kalu, who is the African Union 6th Region representative here in Canada, and so many of you from community organization. The Ontario Black History Society is well represented here, and they have put some stuff out inviting us all to not only think about Ontario, but also see ourselves as part of Canada so that we can reach out to other parts of our country, especially Atlantic Canada, including Halifax and there around. So I pay my respects not only to all of you who are doing community work on a daily basis, but I also want to thank all of you who today, Sunday, family weekend, could be someplace else doing something else, and you choose to come, you choose to be part of community. For me, community has always been important. I honed my skills, and I developed a whole series of things as a result of the support that I've had from community. So I know what it is to belong, and those of you who come and who bring your children with you, it is so important, because I used to bring my kids to every meeting that I went to, and oftentimes they knew more about meetings and what was taking place, so I can say to them, Mommy's going to a meeting tonight, and they knew what meeting was. And so they didn't cry to come with me or cry because I was leaving. They knew what meetings were about. It was also an opportunity for them to meet important people at meetings. so that my kids were on first name basis with Roy McMurtry. He was really the Attorney General, Oscar Peterson. And again, he was the big name in wherever, because they met these people at meetings and they were introduced to these people, and they get a sense that our community is not a community that does not have access and does not have important people in the community. So I want to talk about 3 things in the 15 minutes that I'm standing here. I want to talk about getting Black History Month in Canada and why I felt it was important for us to do that. And I want to underscore this film that you saw on the decade for people of African descent. We talk about how the UN does that. And it's not just for us to get out there and do whatever because it's a decade for African descent, but there is a more important message, and I'll talk a bit about that. And hopefully I'll talk about legacy, what we have in our community, what we don't have in our community, what we leave behind in our community, and the importance of what we leave for our children and our grandchildren as we compare our community to other communities where a whole lot of things are happening. Okay, so first of all, I grew up in Grenada, St. George's, Grenada, in a small place 3 miles outside St. George's called Happy Hill. I grew up in an extended family situation where there was a grandmother and there were lots of aunts and lots of very strong women within the family. There were lots of men. I said that at one time when someone asked. I said there were lots of men in the family, but I don't remember any of them. I remember the strong women, the women who were supportive, the women who did all the work, the women who looked after the whatever little monies that there was, who spent it judiciously, and who were always very encouraging in terms of getting an education. Boys and girls, you may not believe this, but I grew up at a time when we had to pay to go to school. And if your family didn't have money, especially for the secondary school level, you just didn't go to secondary school. When I grew up as a girl, there were 4 or 5 opportunities for employment. I could be a nurse, I could be a teacher, I could be a nurse, a teacher, I could work in a department store, I could be a civil servant, or I could get married, or I can have children. So the opportunities were not there. For young people now, the sky is the limit. There are so many opportunities. Your parents don't have to worry about where the dollars are going to come from to get you an education or to get you the school uniform. We now have the province of Ontario announcing that secondary and also university would be available free to young people in special needs or special economic situation. So we know that in order to make our way in this society, you have to have an education. And those people, and I know some of the young people who are here, might be people with all kinds of degrees. You stayed, you got the education, you got all the pieces of paper, as my grandmother would say, and you still can't find the kind of job that you want. But it's important to know that what you have is not lost. Because when the opportunity comes, you are ready. And one of the things that I say often is opportunity dances with those on the dance floor. If you're not on the dance floor, when opportunity comes, you won't get that opportunity. Opportunity dances with those on the dance floor. So you have your pieces of paper, you have your qualification, you did go to school, you just wait for that opportunity. You just work towards that opportunity. You just set some goals. You extend your network. You get to meet people. You get to talk with people. And oftentimes, the appointments you have or the conversations you have may not give you an immediate job, but what it does is it extends the network and sends you to another level where there might be an opportunity. So I grew up in Happy Hill. I did all that was necessary at the time to get myself through high school with St. Joseph's Convent High School, and started as a pupil teacher in Grenada. A pupil teacher is someone who comes out of high school, goes into the elementary school, starts teaching under the supervision and the attention of what is called a master teacher. So when I came to Toronto in 1960, I already had my teaching certificate, and I already had been teaching. My first push against the system in Canada was when I went to get the papers to apply for Teachers College. You see, in the 50s or 60s and way into the 70s, if you wanted to be a teacher, you had to go to Teachers College. And so I wanted to go to Teachers College. You had to go to Queen's Park and get the forms to sign up for Teachers College. So I went to the desk to get the forms. And I was told, sorry, you have to do grade 13. Do you guys know what grade 13 is? The little ones would know because we phased out grade 13. And I said, no, I have more than grade 13. And I put my chest up, I have Oxford and Cambridge overseas school certificate, A-level, and it's more than grade 13. And so she said, sorry, you have to do grade 13. And she closed the window, and I stood there. And then she opened it and called the person behind me, and the person behind me, and the person behind me, and I kept standing. So that was my first push against the system here in Canada, insisting that I was not going to do anything but get those forms so that I could be admitted to Teachers College. You see, in those days, in 1960, Toronto and Canada was ripe for activism. And what do I mean by that? We had no Charter of Rights and Freedom. That didn't come until 1982. We had no landlord and tenant, so that a landlord could decide to rent or not rent to you on the basis of skin color, place of origin, or accent. We had no police community relations. The SIU and all these things we talk about now didn't come till later. We had no landlord and tenant act. We had no relations, school board and community and all of those things that we take for granted now. So those of us who were here in the early 60s, who wanted to make things happen, had to organize, had to partner, had to create organizations, had to support organizations, and had to push against the system. We don't hear a lot now about marches on the street. But in the 60s, we were marching. Just about every weekend there was a march, either in front of Queen's Park or somewhere in a government office to shake the system and to make things happen. A lot of people got their heads busted. A lot of people got arrested. A lot of people came back time and time again, despite the push and the resistance on the part of agencies, governments, policy people who were not inclined to make those changes. We know now that we have governments, we have policies, we have a whole series of things in place, and we can quote from what government has said, what is on paper, what policy areas there are to make the changes that we would like to see. And so having come through the system and having come through the 60s and having come through as a classroom teacher, as a vice principal and principal, supervisory officer, and it was not easy. I watched weaker teachers, weaker male teachers in particular, who all they wanted to teach was the phys ed. I watched the school board officials saying to them, why don't you go down to the board and put in your application for a vice principal? In those days, that was the way it was done. But I did what my grandmother told me, get your pieces of paper, get all your pieces of paper, and wait. Get all your pieces of paper. And so I had my BA, my master's in education. I had everything that the department of the ministry offered in terms of teacher training. I had all my pieces of paper. So by the time I applied, I had more than I needed. So I left the school system at one point in time on a secondment to head the Metro Toronto Housing Authority. That was that tough job. It was 1988, and the crack cocaine was just starting to hit all of the high rises and all of the communities. I didn't know anything about supply, but I thought I knew something about demand. And so we started a whole series of programs to work with young people. All the programs around recreation and whatnot that's in housing. The rookie ball with the Blue Jays and all the stuff that's going on, those were things that we started, that I started when I was at Metro Toronto Housing. But through all of this, a lot of the folks that I hung out with were from Atlantic Canada, were 6th and 7th generation Black Canadians, were people from Southwestern Ontario who were 7th generation Black Canadians, and I knew very little about their history. And I wondered, as I taught social studies, where were the books? Where were the texts? Where were the curriculum documents that would help me, not only myself as an educator to understand, but help me to get those students who are sitting in my classroom to understand the history of Black people in Canada. And I'm going to take an aside. I was at an event 2 Saturdays ago, and they had about 20 to 25 young people on the stage. They were beautifully dressed, they were well-spoken, beautiful children, yours and mine. And each child had to read something about, it's Black History Month, read something about a Black person. I could have wept at the end, because of all the 25 or so persons that they read about, not one was Canadian. It was Martin Luther King, it was Rosa Parks, it was Muhammad Ali, it was Malcolm X, it was, do you get the drift? Not one was a Black Canadian. So it said to me that those young people either could not find any references that they could look up of Black Canadians, or they were not directed to find Black Canadians. But then on reflection, I recognize that sometimes our young people know more about Washington and Trump than they know about Parliament Hill and some of the folks on Parliament Hill who are making decisions that affect their lives. I was talking to one young group the other day, and just joking with this young man, and can't remember what the conversation was about, and I said to him, "You got a girlfriend?" And he said to me, "I'm taking the 5th. I'm taking the 5th, Mrs. Augustine." I said, "You're in Canada. We don't have any 5th. All right? You know the Fifth Amendment? He's taking the 5th. He's in Canada. He's not been to the U.S. He's not lived in the U.S., but he knows about the 5th. So we need to make sure that our young people know our history and know the history. And right now, the school boards are putting out really good curriculum material. And then there are places like the Ontario Black History Society. And then there are archives. And then there are so many places, Ontario Heritage. And then there is the Film Board, the National Film Board. There are so many resources around us if we look for it and provide that for our children. And so when the time came, when I could do something and make a change, I was told that there were 2 ways in which one can get Black History Month in Canada. Remember, Black History Month was celebrated in the United States since about 1926. A young man called Carter G. Woodson, who grew up in the South in a mining town. And in that mining town, they send the kids to the mines to pick up some of the charcoal, you know, the coal that was dropped. And that's how the families make a bit of money. Kids would come home with some of the coal that they picked up. As they were bagging the coal or putting them on the truck, things would fall and they would pick up and bring home, and the parents would sell them. The opportunity to go to school, according to the story. When he got to the north, when the family moved from that area in the south to the north, that was his first opportunity to go to school. And by then he was 16, going on 17. Can you imagine not being able to read and going to school for the first time? The story goes that he finished high school in 2 years and was well on his way to university. As he started reading, he was an avid reader. And I've often said to librarians, you know, Black History Month started in the library, because Carter would go in there and he would get every book that he could read about black people, because he thought that all blacks were as poor as he was, and all blacks lived in the same situation that he knew. But then as he started to read, he found out that there were kingdoms in Africa, that there were kings and queens and education and all kinds of stuff, that we were inventors and we were innovators, and he thought everybody should know this. So he would say to the librarian, put out the book, put out the book. And the librarian did, and they did it one day, and then the story goes, it went from 1 day to 2 days, it went from 1 day to 1 week, and it went from 1 week to 1 month. And the month was February, because there were 2 important holidays when black people would stay at home, when black people would gather and have festivals and happenings. There were 2 birthdays in February. One was Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, who was one of the presidents who had some concerns about slavery, and the other was the birth date of Frederick Douglass. And so with those two birth dates happening in February, the librarian, I guess, together with Carter G. Woodson, decided that that was a good month in order to get the books out there and the time out there. So they have been celebrating that in the United States, and in Toronto, the celebration was picked up because we had men who worked on the railroad going back and forth from the US into Toronto and bringing back news about events that were taking place in the US. So Toronto very, very early started the celebration of Black History Month. And so when I got the opportunity, someone said to me the other day, so you gave us Black History Month in the shortest month of the year and the coldest month of the year. Well, I didn't select that. It was simply that it was happening in February, and therefore, as Canada, we didn't want to go with another month. And so I called on the House to recognize the important contribution of Black Canadians to the settlement, the growth, and development of Canada, the diversity of the Black community in Canada, and its importance to the history of Canada, and ask Parliament to recognize February as Black History Month. Notice that the motion didn't have all the things that an activist wants to say, right? You want to tell them everything. But if you want unanimous consent, if you want everybody to say yes, you can't put in anything that's debatable. And so I went straight for, as a friend of mine would say, I went straight for the jugular. There is nothing debatable here. That this House take note of the important contribution of Black Canadians to the settlement, the growth, and the development of Canada. Nothing debatable there. The diversity of the Black community in Canada. Nothing debatable. The importance to the history of this country, history of Canada. And then the Speaker, of course, asked if I had unanimous consent. And when you put a motion like this and you're standing, you're looking at everybody, because if one person said no, the motion is down. And so he said, is it agreed? And then I heard d'accord, okay, aye, yes. And so December 14, 1995, the Parliament of Canada pronounced February as Black History Month. I can tell you, it's not as easy as I'm telling it, because when you have 305 members of Parliament and you want all of them to agree, you have to speak to them. And so I had all kinds of provocative things like, so who is going to come for me? And when you take February, or is there going to be a White History Month? You know, stuff like that. So when I put the motion, I'm standing there, I'm looking at those characters who had said those things to me, almost with my teacher's eyes, daring them to say no. But we had unanimous consent. And so we started to celebrate. And we celebrated the following year with the first Black person who set foot in Canada. And I'll ask you, who is the first Black person in this that we know of who set foot in Canada? Matthew DaCosta. And after we agreed, having seen some history somewhere that was Matthew DaCosta, we had quite a time. The Department of Heritage working with me to make sure that we had some image and we knew something about Matthew da Costa. Because we knew that he was born in the Azores, that he was a free African. We knew he knew 5 languages, 5 or more languages. He knew Portuguese and Spanish and French and English and Mi'kmaq and his own African language. We knew also that the year was 1604. But what it took Heritage Canada months and months to agree on was how you spell Matthew. Was it M-A-T-T or was it M-A-T-H-I-E-U? And was it Da Costa, DeCoste, Da Costa? Because all those were names in Portugal, in the Azores at the time. And trying to trace the family or the name, the slave master's name that were given to this young man, it was quite a back and forth. Is my time up? Yes? Okay. All right, let me finish. Okay. And so we had a celebration, the very first celebration in the Parliament of Canada, in the name of Matthew da Costa. Do you know who the second person that we know for sure who came to Canada? Olivier Legendre. Olivier Legendre was a young boy, 9 years old, 8 to 9 years old, and he was brought to a priest to be baptized. He was a slave, enslaved young man, and when the priest asked for his name, the slave master just looked at the priest and the priest looked at him, and so what they did, they took the priest's name and the slave master's name and baptized him. So he was Olivier Legendre, and his baptismal paper is in the archives in, his baptismal certificate is in Montreal. And again, historians touch and feel and read from there. The Decade for People of African Descent, and I'll end on that because I think it is important that we recognize when the UN makes a declaration. There are 100 and how many countries in the UN? I was someplace and I asked that, and everybody went to Dr. Google. Right? So around the 198 countries in the UN, every country is a country is a country. So my island, Grenada, stands equally with the United States or with China or any of the big countries, because it does not go by population, it goes by the fact that you are a country, a geographical area. And the United Nations sees the situation of people around the world because they ask for reports. And reports are done all the time. Reports are done on the health issues of countries and nations. Reports are done on education. By the way, Barbados always used to come up as the #1 in terms of literacy around the world. Everybody in Barbados is able to read and write, and everybody in Barbados go to school. The African countries all seem to drop towards the bottom of all the scales that they're using. But when they look at an overall scale, no matter where people of African descent are in the world, in Europe, in Asia, wherever, people of African descent on a broad scale always seem to fall to the bottom. And so the United Nations says, hey, we have to do something about this. Remember they did something about this when women were at the bottom. They asked to do status of women, and they asked us to bring up the status of women, etc. And they're doing the same thing now. They said, there you have 10 years, countries around the world, to raise the status of people of African descent. So they ask governments to do things to assist us to bring our numbers up. So this decade for people of African descent, all around the world, countries are looking at what is happening in their territories. There has to be a report written by each country, and I'm sure that by 1919, 1920, Canada will start to write its report. So it's important for us to ask our representatives and ask people what are they doing and what is being input into Canada's report, and how are our situation going to be better as a result for the decade for women, the decade for people of African descent, just as we reported on the decade for women. So, my time is up. I'm always a long storytelling speaker. I wanted to say something about legacy because this is my concern right now. When I see other communities have banquet halls, and they have nursing homes, and they have people who employ other people and all kinds of things, I ask myself, what are we leaving for our young people? What legacies are we building? What are we doing? How can we come together? And how can we ensure that we leave that legacy, and we leave legacies for our young people? I could say much more about that, but merci beaucoup. Thank you for the opportunity.